Listen, I love horror stories and ghost hunting as much as the next guy, but sometimes in talking about places like asylums, we can really dehumanize the people who used to live there. That's kind of what I want to talk about today with the Athens Asylum, a local asylum that's right here in Ohio. I want to talk about the patients in particular. I want to talk about who they were, what they did, and how they were mistreated and taken care of by the Athens Asylum. Let's get into it. Foucault argues that back in medieval times, bad people were allowed to wander the streets as long as they caused no harm to others. Others argue that there have been institutions since the Byzantine Empire to house the mentally ill and insane. Hospitals were built in the 1500s to house lepers in what Foucault calls the Great Confinement. These were later turned into madhouses. This phenomenon spread as many people were confined to institutions. Later, a host of asylums were built in 19th century America following the Civil War. This is what brings us to the Athens Asylum. If this history interests you, I would recommend Madness and Civilization and the Routledge History of Madness and Mental Health. They both cover far more ground than I could in this video. This could be a whole long hour video itself. Many people argue that these institutions help people, while other people argue that they harmed more. A quote that really stuck with me about the history of the asylums from the Routledge history was Henry Maudsley, who had gratefully cut his ties with the Athens Asylum for an office-based practice, concurred, "I cannot help but feeling, from my experience, that one effect of asylums is to make permanent lunatics." We also have to discuss stigma around asylums and mental illness. There's been stigma around the mentally ill and the developmentally disabled for a long time. Unfortunately, this leads to things like the eugenics movement, particularly prominent in 1910s America. The invention of psychotropic drugs and the deinstitutionalization movement changed asylums greatly in the 50s and 60s, making community care play a larger role in mental health recovery than institutionalization. So while I'll be focusing today on the neurodivergent men and women, or the MAD men and women, of the Athens Asylum, the MAD men and women of the Athens Asylum will include psychotic patients, various mentally unwell folks, mentally disabled folks, physically disabled patients, and patients suffering from tuberculosis to dementia, who were all grouped together in the asylum. In general, the history of the MAD is not just the history of the MAD. As Richard Knowles says, madness is a moving target, and plays a big role in doing any sort of history of madness or mental health history. This is a nuanced history. There were people in the asylum who were mad, and others who were hospitalized for things like being single mothers. There were violent patients, and there were peaceful patients, but they were more than just their mad and disabled identities. And out of the staff there's some that were there to help the patients, while others were there to harm the patients. Okay, now let's dive into the Athens Asylum. What was the Athens Asylum? The Athens Asylum, or more accurately, the Athens Institution, is a facility for the mentally ill and disabled people in Athens, Ohio. It accepted patients between the years 1874 and 1993, although construction began in 1867 and the building was dedicated the following year. Lots of sun and air, kitchen work, work in the dairy, work in the field, picking fruit, and mending were all daily part of residents' lives. They had the patients do free labor in a farm as the asylum was self-sustaining. At the time, it was the largest business in Athens, Ohio, which kind of makes you think. The style of this asylum architecture was the style of Kirkbride, created by psychiatrist Thomas Kirkbride, which was a newer style specifically for improving the conditions of the asylum. The Athens Asylum was designed by Levi Scottfield in the Kirkbride style to have wings for different patients and allow sunlight and proper airflow. It's a tragedy, but previously lunatics were housed in prisons, although the Kirkbride plan was made to try and give the experience of living in a Victorian home. Both an architectural style and mental health plan developed by the psychiatrist Thomas Kirkbride to pursue treatment morale was put in place. Kirkbride advocated for moral treatment, an approach that emphasized humane conditions with the goal of rehabilitating patients to the highest extent possible. This was revolutionary at this time. This included creating the physical buildings to certain specifications, including size, access to light and air, a natural setting for recreation, stimulation, and farming. Though we can talk about the ways this architecture was unsuccessful as well. Twisting staircases, which we'll get to later, and not being built for the amount of people that ended up being housed in the Athens asylums were some of its biggest problems. They were very focused on group therapy at the Athens asylum. It wasn't all farm and flowers, though. There were a lot of horrors and neglect that took place in this asylum as well. The Athens asylum is known for being one of the last places in America to perform the lobotomy. Other types of therapy were hydrotherapy, electroshock therapy, and art therapy. There are also rumors of abuse by staff that can't be confirmed nor denied. Also, a small aside, there was like an alligator living in the fountain at the Athens Asylum, which is just random. Apparently one of the staff members like got it on a trip to Florida and then just kind of like let it live there, which is just buck wild. Now, the patients. The patients are the main reason that I made this video. I've been working with inquests, packets of patients' information, from the Athens Mental Health Center since I began working in digital initiatives in fall 2023. Immediately, they fascinated me. The stories of patients long forgotten, the complexities of mental health and family lives, and the lives of those living with mental illness and disabilities. After this, I started doing my own work researching the Athens Asylum. A lot of the work focusing on the Athens Asylum focused on the health care staff that lived there, and I wanted to focus on the patients. As someone who dealt with my own bout of psychosis in 2023, following the beginning of my work in the archives, I felt a strong connection to the patients and the Athens Mental Health Center, also known as the Athens Asylum, also known as the Athens Institution. It had like 8 names. My fascination grew. Had I lived 200 or even 60 years ago, I could have been put in asylum for the rest of my life. I returned to digital initiatives in 2024, and I was chosen as an Ohio Link Lumineer intern the same year, and I knew I wanted my work to focus on the Athens Asylum. I wanted people to know that these people were not something to be afraid of, not something to write horror stories about, not specters to hide away from, but multifaceted humans with inner lives and sicknesses that were far too complicated to explain. So who were the people who lived in the Athens Asylum? The truth is, like all people, they were a variety of people with different stories and different reasons for being in the asylum. The inquests in the OU archives can tell you a little bit about patient conditions and little bits about their family lives. I've read about patients being locked in their parents' basements. I've read about lots of religious. I've read about a lot of religious delusions and violent and non-violent patients. I've read about suicidal patients. I've read about just single mothers. I've read about people with tuberculosis and people with other disabilities. I've read about blind people and deaf people, and really a variety of people were housed there. Another way to learn about patients is through the Green Hill Patient newspapers, which tell all about patient life and the activities that took place there. The patients discuss who visited whom, what was on the patient's minds, and whatever holiday was being most recently celebrated. On top of this, patients share poetry and recent news. Margaret Schilling, a popular legend here in Athens, known for her tragic death in the Athens Mental Health Center due to the neglect of the center staff, was a mentally disabled patient. Margaret was a woman who, due to the neglect of the system, was lost in the building. It is said that she died of a heart attack. For 42 days, they did not find her until she was discovered dead in a room with a twisting staircase. Her body left a stain that is still there to this day. This just shows the neglect of the institution and the staff there. But she should be known for more than this, for more than the stain her body left behind. A former Athens Asylum worker talks about finding Margaret smoking a cigarette and talking to her about her beautiful kids. She was a mother, and from the sound of it, a kind person. In the film The Athens Asylum, the worker recalls that she doesn't seem like the kind of person that would haunt anywhere. Another great resource about the patients' lives is Catherine Ziff's book, Asylum on the Hill. I've got it here somewhere. Another great resource about the patients' lives is Catherine Ziff's book, Asylum on the Hill. There's an entire chapter on the patients of the Athens Asylum and some of their stories, the first patient being a teenage girl with epilepsy. Throughout the years, many disabled patients were housed there simply because the system didn't know what else to do with them, and, like mentally ill people, they were considered untouchables. Finally, the Naming the Numbered project is a great way to learn about the lives of the people who lived in the asylum. This project tells us about the people buried in numbered graves on the grounds of the Athens Mental Health Center. This is beyond dehumanizing, not even giving them graves with names. I wish we knew more about the individual patients of the Athens Asylum, more than their conditions and the little tidbits we find in these resources. But there's power in these stories, in viewing mentally ill people as full, nuanced humans. So is the Athens Asylum haunted? It's no more likely than any other hospital, any other institution that built a business by exploiting marginalized people. So let's have some food for thought. How have institutions where we have kept the mentally ill changed? In what ways have they stayed the same? Why do we align mentally ill and disabled people with horror stories and hauntings? What is timeless? Madness is timeless, but so is the beauty. So is creativity. So is nuance. So is our desire to help others. I want to close this little food for thought video with a poem by one of the Athens Asylum patients named Will. Yellow, mellow, ripened days, sheltered on a golden coating, o'er the dreamy, listless haze, white and dainty cloudlets floating, winking at the blushing trees, at the somber furrowed fallow, smiling at the airy ease of the southward flying swallow. Sweet and smiling are thy ways, beauteous golden are autumn days, shivering, quivering, tearful days, fretfully and sadly weeping, dreading still with anxious gaze, icy fetters round thee creeping, o'er the cheerless withered plain, woefully and hoarsely calling, pelting hail and drenching rain on thy scanty vestments falling. Sad and mournful are thy ways, grieving, wailing autumn days. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see more history and fashion and just varied content, please subscribe. This is my first shot at something like this, so we're gonna hope it was what you wanted. If you want to hear more about the Athens Asylum, I have been researching this for the past 2 years of my life, so I'd be totally up to tell you more. If you have any questions, just comment below, and have a great one, everyone. Stay rad, you guys. Bye.